Friends, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you to this webinar on risk sensing and fraud intelligence organized by Fintelekt and the Asian Bankers Association. By way of introduction, my name is SHIRISH. I work at Fintelekt and I will be your host today. At the outset, let me thank the Asian Bankers Association for their ongoing support to make these webinars tremendously popular and well attended. For today's webinar, we have over 600 registrations from around 45 countries. I also noticed that we have a large number of bankers logged in from the Philippines today. So a quick message for all of you, if you haven't done so already, do register for the AMLC Fintelekt Philippines AML CTF Summit that will take place next week from November 23rd to 27th. This is a national level summit over 5 days organized by the Philippines FIU and Fintelekt. And we have over 32 local and international speakers covering a range of topics over the week. Also, our next Fintelekt ABA webinar on AML governance will take place now on December 16th and not on December 2nd as originally planned. For those of you who have already registered, please note the change in date. Obviously, you will receive a notification from us over email. And for those of you who haven't yet registered, please visit fintelekt.com/webinars and register. Moving to today's webinar now, we have 3 panelists for today's session. I welcome all 3 panelists. They are Bernard Law, CHUA Chun Hong, and Devendra Raghav. I will be speaking about each of them later on during the session. The format is that the discussion and presentation today will, as usual, be followed by a Q&A session with the audience. So feel free to keep posting questions using the Q&A button on your screen. The length of today's webinar is totally about an hour, and of which 45 minutes will be spent in presentations and discussions with the panelists. And then we will have about 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So Bernard, CHOON, and Devendra, welcome to this webinar. I look forward to the discussion. I will first spend some time soliciting insights from Bernard Law on the subject, and later on with CHOON and Devendra. Now, before I ask Bernard some questions, let me say a few words about him. Bernard Law was the former head of the Hong Kong Financial Intelligence Unit, and he also worked in the Hong Kong Police for around 26 years on both FIU and money laundering investigations. He has also participated in the Asia Pacific group work and has been the law enforcement and FIU assessor to the mutual evaluation for Lahore, PDR, and Sri Lanka, in addition to working in a role as co-head of the IIWG in APG. Bernard is now the head of financial crime compliance and the money laundering reporting officer at Airstar Bank, which is a relatively new virtual bank operated by Xiaomi in Hong Kong. Bernard, welcome to the session, and let me start with the first question to you. So Bernard, on this topic, what are the expectations of regulators from banks and financial institutions around risk sensing, given that it should be considered an integral part of the risk-based approach?
Okay, thanks, SHIRISH. First of all, let me thank for your welcome invitation for me to speak in that webinar. It's my honor. Back to the question about the expectation of regulators on the risk sensing. I think with no doubt, risk sensing or risk assessment is regarded by the regulator as the paramount importance process before the risk-based approach can be applied. In fact, there are 2 main areas of risk assessment. One is on the macroscopic, i.e. country level, while the other is on the microscopic institution level, that means on the bank level. According to the FATF recommendation 1, countries should identify, assess, and understand the money laundering and terrorist financing risk for the country, and should take action, including designating an authority or mechanism to coordinate action to assess risk and apply resources aimed at ensuring the risk is mitigated effectively. So just put in a very nutshell that the country, from the macroscopic level, you should understand what type of risk the country exposed, and then you identify that high-risk area, and then with the most effective use of resources to put the resources to tackle the problem, the risk here. So at the country level, the administration needs to conduct a so-called national risk assessment. I think all of you should heard about the national risk assessment if your country has experienced the FATHAK or APG assessment. That national risk assessment should include the sectoral assessment on the financial sector for the exposed money laundering or terrorist financing risk, which are a threat and vulnerable to the financial sector. So even in a country level, there should be a sector-specific assessment. We are from the financial sector, so they should have a financial sector sectoral assessment on the risk. Then the assessment will assist the bank to be aware of the predominant money laundering or terrorist financing risk exposed to the country, which could impact on the integrity of the financial system. Now take a very simple example is if the prevalent money laundering or terrorist financing risk of a country could be a cross-border scam due to the nature of the international financial hub of the assessed country, which require the financial institution to pay particular attention on the wire payments for suspicious transaction. So that means once your country identify a predominating threat or the predominating crime, then which will cause an impact to your institution, then you should think about something to deal with the possible facts. That is the reason why we need to have the national risk assessment and the sectoral assessment. However, it should be emphasized that the national risk assessment is not a one-off exercise, as risk is dynamic and must be kept under constant review. So now, finish the macroscopic country level, let's go to the institution level. At the institution level, the regulator would also expect the bank or financial institution to conduct its own institutional risk assessment, IRA, require IRA, by drawing reference to the National Risk Assessment Report on the major threats and vulnerable area. It echo what I mentioned before. Once you have the macroscopic knowledge, then you go to your institution to look into the microscopic or institution-specific risk exposure. The purpose of that institutional risk assessment, IRA, is to ensure the bank has implemented a risk-based and integrated approach to combat money laundering and terrorist financing and sanction activities, which fundamentally must be built on an assessment of the money laundering or terrorist financing and sanction risk presented to the bank. It is the expectation of the regulator for the bank to understand the inherent risk associated in this risk area, i.e. customer risk, product and service risk, geography risk, and the delivery channel risk. The bank is then required to collect a bunch of qualitative and quantitative data. Example, the size of the customer in your bank, any risk such as the impersonation risk of the product to determine this risk level. The regulator would then expect the bank to think about the mitigating and control measure to address the risk identified. Examples can be good governance, CDD, transaction monitoring, sanction screening, etc. By comparing the inherent risk and control measure, residual risk of the bank could be estimated. Through the IRA process, the bank should understand its weakest link on the AML and CFT and sanction areas, and then resources should be deployed to the high-risk area in devising effective control measure to make the adoption of risk-based approach feasible. In general, the scale and scope of the IRA should be commensurate with the nature, size, and complexity of the business of the bank. The IRA should consider any higher risk identified in other relevant risk assessment, which may be issued from time to time, such as the National Risk Assessment Report and any higher risk notified to the bank by the regulator. The regulator also expects the financial institution to perform a group-wide risk assessment if there's a branch or subsidiary outside the jurisdiction where it is incorporated. To keep the IRA up to date, the financial institution should conduct its assessment regularly. In Hong Kong, the regulator expects an update of your bank's institutional report in every 2 years, and upon triggering events which are material to the bank's business and risk exposure. Now we're down to the product and service or customer level. There are also expectations from the regulator on the risk assessment. Prior to launch of new product, new business practice, new service, or use of the new technology, risk assessment is also required, an appropriate measure to manage and mitigate the risk identified should be in place. For customer risk assessment, the customer risk profile must be conducted to separate customer into different risk levels for the easy implementation of appropriate and proportionate CTD and risk mitigating measure. As a result, high-risk customer will be given with more resources for conducting enhanced CTD measures, while low-risk customers should be adopted with simplified CTD measures in recognition of the lower risk is exposed to the bank. Back to you, Shirish.
Thanks, Bernard. For those of you who joined in a bit late in the webinar, because I've seen that a few people have come in after Bernard was speaking. I'm currently speaking with Bernard Law, who was earlier with the Hong Kong FIU and now the head of FCC and MLRO at Airstar Bank. So Bernard, you're also one of the very few people, I think, globally who have experience on both sides of the table. You've been a regulator and a reporting entity. So, as the MLRO of a new age bank, what, according to you, are the specific AML risks that are emerging or likely to emerge due to the shift to digital banking, especially as customers in this model are likely to have no face-to-face contact with banks?
Yeah. Thank you, Shirish, for the question. I think for me, I'm the right person to speak because, after I left the public sector, I joined Standard Chartered Bank and then now to the challenger bank, the digital banking. So I would say I experienced, all different levels of different requirements from regulator, traditional bank, now to digital bank. So your question is very valid, for the non-face-to-face nature of digital bank would definitely impose some specific anti-money laundering risk, which are not experienced in the traditional bank. I think the most vulnerable area is on the remote onboarding, which involves non-face-to-face contact to verify the identity of the applicant. Unlike the traditional way for account opening in a normal bank, you need to go to the branch and present your ID document for the bank staff to verify and ask the necessary CTD information in a face-to-face situation. But for the account opening process of digital bank, we will rely on technology, i.e. we use the electronic know your customer tool, or abbreviation we call EKYC tool for the identity verification. For those have no idea what EKYC tool, normally it will consist of two parts to verify the identity of the applicant with that technology. One part is on the video taking of the ID document to test the genuineness of the ID document by examining the security features of your ID document. Usually I don't go into details, but every ID document, no matter it's passport or national ID, they have some inbuilt security features. So that part that will use that security check to verify whether your card is genuine or not. And the other part is relying on selfie, the picture of the applicant via series of head movement or mouth movement to ascertain whether the applicant is a live person, but not a dummy or attempting to disguise the true identity by wearing a face mask, for example. So if you have experience to open an account using the eKYC tool, normally you have to present your document for video taking, and then for selfie your own pictures, and ask you to do some movement. So in our bank, the quickest process for 5 minutes. 5 minutes for you to open the account for that IDV, and also do a background AML check of screening, etc. Normally we take 5 minutes, so it is quite different from the traditional bank. You have to go to the branch to queue the line, whatever, to take a long time for the account opening process. But having said that, 5 minutes, you cannot compare to 30 minutes if I said face-to-face account opening process. So there are always limitations restricted to typology, and that's no exception to the eKYC tool used for onboarding. As said, unlike the face-to-face interaction, the bank staff can make query to the applicant if necessary and check the ID document physically, or even touch it or feel it to confirm the genuineness if required. As a result, it is absolutely necessary to have your eKYC tool tuned to the highest reliability, and if possible, check the reliability of the system with the false ID card provided by some of the law enforcement agency to assure the system is robust. I think to country, in Hong Kong, we have that advantage. We have a good cooperation with the police. We can borrow some false ID card for us to check our system, whether our system is reliable. If the false ID card allow the application process to go through, we need to tune the eKYC tool again to make sure every false ID card is being rejected. Another control and mitigate measure could be conducting sample manual check on the video and selfie picture after onboarding, and lowering the transaction threshold before the manual review is completed. That kind of manual review allow you to review in person with the video and the selfie picture to make sure there's no miss on the eKYC tool. Through the manual process, you can pick up some false or unusual cases. Despite it would cause inconvenience to the customers, but it could help to remediate the gap of the use of eKYC tool in onboarding customer via the law of face-to-face means. Another area of emerging risk of digital bank is the use of the stooge or mule account. I would like to look into this matter from the angle of criminal psychology. Criminal would feel more easy to open accounts in the digital bank via the non-face-to-face remote account opening process, since it looks like they are doing something without being watched. In addition, there's also a risk that the accounts are not opened by the applicant themselves, but a criminal syndicate helping the stooge to open the account in view of non-face-to-face nature. The criminal syndicate would recruit a number of stooges who are paid to sell their accounts for the illegal use. In view of the non-face-to-face nature, the criminal syndicate would even help the stooge to selfie the photo and video used by the criminal syndicate for different illegal activities such as bookmaking, loan sharking, etc. Recently, there is a case in Hong Kong in which the criminal syndicate has recruited a number of stooges by making use of the accounts open in the digital bank for accepting bets for illegal bookmaking. To detect the suspicious transaction via post-transaction monitoring may not be effective, as the amount of the transaction, particularly for the street-level type of crime, are not particularly high. Thanks to the use of mobile device for the account operation in digital bank, one of the possible means to detect the use of stooge account could rely on checking whether the same device is used for multiple account opening and subsequent operation via the IT information in the back end. Should the digital bank has put the sampling manual check process in place, suspicious customer could still be caught by reviewing the selfie picture taken during onboarding to identify suspicious transactions, such as whether the application is made by third party, applications made with the suspicious background, such as at the script, or with such suspicious one can be another red flag indicator. So back to you, Shirish.
Thanks. Thanks, Bernard. Bernard, in the interest of time, I had one more question for you, but I think we will take it after the other two speakers.
Okay, sure. Thanks.
And so let me introduce our next speaker, CHUA Hong, Head of Compliance Solutions, APAC at Bureau van Dijk, which is a Moody's analytics company. CHOON has over 15 years of experience in business development for enterprise and regulatory software, and holds a business degree from Singapore Management University. CHOON, welcome to the session, and maybe have your presentation now.
Thank you, Shirish. Always a pleasure. I must thank our earlier speaker, Bernard, for the very insightful conversation that he's had, because what he's done, he set the stage of the macro risk that the country and the banks are facing today. Now, what I will hope and attempt to do is answer then how do we execute the various solutions and possibility of doing this to answer to some of these requirements, right? So as we look at how we look at different country risk or risk typology, right? So how do we do then that horizon scan? So what we would like to do is then we need to know what are the emerging risks in a very timely manner that are happening across the geography that probably matters the most to your organization. Now, what's important and what was also mentioned by the earlier speaker, right? Fraud typology, money laundering typology, they're always constantly evolving, right? So you have fraudsters that's always trying to keep one step ahead of what you're trying to do. And so we then have to be one step ahead of the fraudster and the criminal organization. Right? Many a times, right, we don't know what we don't know, unfortunately, until we step on the landmine, right? So what we will hope to do is then shorten the curve that we can learn from this. Now, if others, unfortunately, has paid the price to learn the lesson, what I will hope is then all other organizations can learn from this. Now, timeliness is going to be very important. So when you are doing a horizon scan, right, what you will hope to achieve is to be able to get the early risk warning in a very timely manner. Because what we're seeing is a lot of the incidents before they snowball into something much bigger, because I make no such allegation, I'm just putting across two news articles, right, that we can see, right, with different time span, right? One early risk warning that started way in January 2019 until certain incidents that happened in 2020 October. Now, in between, there are other incidents that will happen within the media. And what you will see is these are things that happen not just to the organization, but to the shareholders, the headquarters, and sometimes subsidiaries of the organization, right? The clients that you're with, right? So the early risk warning will give you time to look at mitigating measures, right? And this might not be your clients directly, right? But it could be associated and related parties to your client. Then when you have such early, what we call weak signals, then what would you do to mitigate that risk before it snowballs or spreads, right, to your organization, right, to the client that your organization is working with, right? So even for our regulators or enforcement agencies within different countries, this will also give you an early warning, right? If there are such things happening in your neighboring countries or in other countries, right, where there are associated parties that are operating within your jurisdiction. Now, this will give you also early risk warning on what's to come, right? So having a timely time series warning system will give you that insights as time goes along, right? So this is important. Timeliness is important. Now, what we're seeing is sometimes you have shareholders or perpetrators that are vast across geography, right? So sometimes I work with organizations. They'll ask me, can I have adverse media coverage in my country. I am only interested in my country, right? But unfortunately, we live in a very highly globalized and regionalized world today, right? So your clients might be local, but you will have shareholders and ultimate beneficial owners that are probably overseas, right? So you must be able to have that exposure, right, to scan the horizon that is much wider than what you are looking at within your country, because then you will be able to look at what are the other, warning signals that are coming in to your country, right? So we've seen if you are in Taiwan, or you're in Cambodia, right? You might have investors, as according to this news, that could be from Taiwan, right? And if there are issues and there are signals of adverse media to perhaps the owner of the company that's operating within associated with the Cambodian banks, then is this something that you might want to look at, right? So having that wide horizon scan will give you then a wider view of what risk might be to come, right? So now we go into the second point, right? Timeliness. Now we're talking of the width of geography sensing. Now, what we mentioned earlier is now there are various emerging and developing risk typology. So now when we have early warnings and we are able to scan a wide horizon, then what is very important now is that we are able to go deep. Why is that so? Because we must learn from the lessons that others have paid the price for. Now, if we're seeing issues and we're learning from the typology, now the question is then, can we learn from this, or are there similar risk exposure within my organization and my jurisdiction? So this is an example, right? We've seen organization, a good client that previously had no other prior red flags to money laundering or fraud, right? And what they did is because of the macro environment, a depressed oil crisis, depressed oil prices, and the COVID situation leading to low demand. Now, what will happen is this company actually has got into a liquidate issue with the financials, right? So they're actually the books are actually in the red, right? They're under waters. Now, but to be able to cover their weak financials, they want to continue to get their credit facilities and liquidation from the liquid facilities from the banks. What they did is they used smaller series of fraudulent transactions to cover up for their financials, right? To do a window dressing to beef up their books where that doesn't exist. And it led to a balloon of a snowball of an exposure where they're not, or they have no intention of paying back the various banks that you're banking with, right? Using phantom assets as collaterals. Now, what we've seen is then there are total bank exposures that led to billions of dollars. Now, granted, these are typologies that are going to be very difficult to detect, but now we've seen this happen. Now, the question is, does your organization today have the ability to then look at this and pick this news up and look at the typology of what happened and learn from this as a risk model to look at what are the exposure then in your organization is faced with, right? And are there risk mitigating measures that you can prevent this incident from happening to your organization, right? So now, when we get timely earning warnings, we get the width of geography, and now we must go deep into all these learnings to learn from the risk typology, right? So we're talking about learning from it. And I mentioned this again, right? If you don't learn from the past history and we learn from the lessons that others have paid the price for, then perhaps we'll see the same repetition again. Right? And truth be told, some of this fraud typology we've seen, a lot of times you've seen it before in the past, right? Beefing up the books or doing front window dressing of the books using fraudulent transactions. We've seen this repeated in history. Now the time has come is for us to then learn from this, and we see how it has evolved, the different models have evolved, and now how can we protect ourselves? So when we talk about getting this horizon scanning, what kind of intelligence are we trying to gather to help us, right? So what we're talking about is to be able to get OXIN data, right, where we call open source intelligence. So what you want is to be able to generate and gather insights from various sources around the world and around the region, right? This will come from various news sources, open sources, right? Perhaps even some from social media, and of course, an ever-building blacklist of the world where there are organizations and people who are already been enforced, right? Be it from sanction lists or enforcement lists around the world. So when we gather all this open source intelligence, then are we then able to overlay this with all the intelligence of corporate ownership, right? And people within organizations to make sense of it, right? So if example, we see earlier, the news where we have organizations that are associated with a fraud typology that are from another country, how do we then overlay this with corporate ownership data that we can sense are there associated and related parties that your clients may or may not be associated with, right? Are they linked via shareholders in other third-party companies? Are they linked as previous directors? So how do we then look at getting insights from such various news sources, right? And once we are able to overlay this, we're able to have a complete sense of then the intelligence together with ownership data. Now let me go deeper so that we can put a context to what I'm trying to see. Now the next step is, now we know the channels where we can gather all this information intelligence from, right? We're getting from news media, source around the world, and we have corporate data ownership. Now what we want to do is to put context to it. So in open source intelligence gathering, what you want is to be able to then get to be able to look at the intelligence by risk domains that matters the most to your organization, right? That are location centric, like what I think the esteemed previous speaker Bernard said. You need to know the evolving risk typology that's coming from different location and geography, right? So one, you're able to filter it down to the different location and look at the risk domain that matters the most to you, be it for money laundering or for fraud or for smuggling, right, for that matter. And once we're able to get this intelligence and sensing and we filter it down, then we have all this data and we look at the associated entities with it and we do a risk assessment on it, right? So if there are high risk that matters the most to the organization that we see now, there are emerging trends that are coming out from this country or particular entity, then you can perform very targeted centric investigation on this, right? Then you will then gather all that media and all the intelligence on that one particular entity that you're looking at that's associated with your organization to have a full 360 views. Then this will form a qualitative assessment to your view on what kind of risk that you might be exposed to. Right, so here, let me put a full context to it again, right? It's a filtering down process, right? It's process driven. You're able to take structured data or unstructured data from various source of channels of intelligence and media. And what we want to do is to be able to make sense of this all over the world, right? We put into a domain that's relevant to the organization, right? Be it for money laundering, for fraud, for human trafficking. Now, once we are able to get that, is then now we're trying to get the relevance and extract all the entities that is within this data sets, right? So now you have the big data that you're able to get a context to it. Now then, looking at what are the risks associated with all these entities, you're able to then score and categorize them, right? Now you're putting the context of a risk-based approach to look at what are the risks that your organization is faced with and if there are any associated parties that's related to your clients, right? Then we can start to look at what are the emerging themes and events that are driving this risk. That is where now you can put them into a operations. Now this is an example where how it may then look like, right? So we are looking at various geography. What are the key risk types that are being driven out of the geography that matters the most to you, that you're looking at, right? And if there are particular risk type that really matters, that stands out, that's trending, then you will need to go deeper to look at what is inside there, right? Then you look at what are the associated, who are the associated entities and parties that is inside there, extract them and look at, if there's any of these parties in the entity network map that matters to your organization. Are there any of your clients associated with your clients that's there, right? Then what we want to do is then when we go deeper into the particular articles and the medias, that's when we call a deeper study to the qualitative approach, right? And we learn from the various typology that's driving such risks, and we learn from it. Then you can create then risk models that is appropriate for you to be able to do your risk sensing and to, I won't say predict, but at least you can protect the organization from such events from happening to you, right? So we learn from the others, the price that they're paid, the history that has happened in a timely manner. We cover as wide as the geography as we can, and we operationalize this so that we know it's data driven, it's scientific in nature, and we can go into a qualitative approach to look at how deep the typology is, right, and create risk models that matters the most. Right, so the key takeaway that I'd like to share with everybody is that you must be able to get early risk warning in a timely manner, so that when the signals are happening across the time series, you have time to create mitigating measures, right? So you must cover the intelligence in the geography as wide as possible, because your clients may be local, but they may have shareholders and beneficial owners that are global in nature, right? We go deep into the risk typology so that we learn from the models or the way it's operating, the way the fraud was operated, right? And we learn from it and we create risk model to mitigate it. We overlay our own organizational clients, UBO shareholder structure to gather the insights to see whether are these associated parties to this, right? And once we're able to put all this together, you can operationalize this intelligence in form or ways of dashboarding, so that any reporting that you can do can have a audit trail, right? And it's in a dashboard manner that you can do management reporting or STR reportings. Right, Shirish, back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, CHOON, for that interesting presentation. I think I personally found it very interesting. Let's now move to our final speaker for the day, Devendra Raghav, who's Head of Compliance and Internal Control at the Qatar National Bank Group. Before we have Devendra's presentations, just a few words about him. He has studied at the Harvard Business School and is a chartered accountant with more than 26 years of exposure to compliance and risk management. Before the QNB Group, he worked with Barclays, HSBC, UBS, Mizuho, and HDFC Bank. Devendra is an avid writer, and his articles are regularly published in leading business newspapers, and he is also a guest faculty at the Indian Institute of Management. Can we have Devendra's presentation now, please?
Good morning, friends. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to be present on this webinar. The view I'm going to express are my personal, not of my employer or employee. That's the conditions apply. Now, if friends, the fraudster costs the world over $1 trillion annually. And in this present environment, the volume and gravity of instances of fraud across various sectors, particularly in the banking sector, has gone up extremely high in the past few years. And the reason being, there is a sweeping change in the scope and magnitude of banking transactions, the emergence of hybrid financial products, and increasing the trend of cross-border financial transactions, and the dynamics of real-time fund movement and transformations. To answer your questions, I would like to place a direct correlation between the risk sensing and the corporate governance. In one side, if you see risk sensing, aim is to detect emerging risks so that the management can mitigate those risks before it generates potentially significant damage. or incur cost, or it may require higher investments. Risk mitigation strategy, that is to trace and detect signals of fraud beforehand so as to strengthen the grip on such incidents. Risk sensing should also be integrated into the risk management and the governance program. This calls for a clear communication from the top and the response plan combined with actionable reports useful to executive, risk managers, and the business unit heads, which means that the summary reports and visualization tools such as a dashboard are also an essential element. Survey reveals that the most executive states that the organizations have the right risk sensing capabilities. However, on the other side, the survey also indicates that these capabilities are often miss key elements like technical depth and analytical sophistications, and it resides in a narrow technical units. Now also see the positive side of risk sensing, which can be used very positively to make the risk power performance. Risk power performance creates value from the risk by moving in early to address nascent market movement and the customer needs, harness the benefit from emerging technologies, and block competitors' efforts to gain first mover advantage. When you know the organization is made of people, now 2/3 believes that they have the right people. But if you see practically, they are so engrossed in their routine operation and clear in their workflow that they hardly get time to think beyond the box. In practice, some companies have the right people, but may not have the right equipment or the right tools. These tools includes not only the data scanning and the sensing, but measurement, analytical, and visualization tools. Companies can also identify emerging trends and thus enhance their understanding of risk-reward trade-off. Now, the trade-off is very important. Inherence in value creations and improve their funding decision and allocation of resources. While risk sensing can help identify emerging problems, all of the capabilities needs to be placed before crisis hits, because the absolute worst time to develop a crisis management strategy is when your back is against the wall and you are running out of options. I've seen in many organizations, there is no organized fraud response management plan to react to the allegations of major fraud or corruptions. It is very critical for an organization to develop fraud response strategies, which would help in minimizing the impact of fraud that occurs and come to the attention of the company. This plan can be valuable in implementing a robust response to allegation under severe time pressure and intense security from the media, regulators, and the investors, and of course, the law enforcement. The overarching goal of fraud response program is to protect the organizations from economical, reputational, and the legal risks associated with the fraud allegations. Shirish, if you see the Europe, just now I was going through the European Union Police Agency, that's Europol, just come out with the statement that the COVID-19 pandemic has not just sparked a rise in cybercrime, but driven an increase in sophistication of such offense. The sophistication of such offense is very, very critical because it's like theft police face. In recent September, the United Nations report also stated that the banks around the world are not doing very little to tackle money laundering and corruptions. Financial controls have failed to keep pace in this digitized world. Unfortunately, fraud and misconduct can seriously undermine such efforts, exposing an organization to legal, regulatory, and reputational damage. That is why the experienced business leaders work to ensure that they have an effective approach to mitigate this risk. This is especially important in an environment marked by intense scrutiny and rising enforcement. Now, one should also remember that no one signal can be seen in isolation, or existence of such signal does not necessarily mean that there is a fraud. In case of fraud, several signals would appear simultaneously. Now, let's take a case of trade finance. Why is trade finance garnering more and more attention from the regulator and equally from the money launderers alike? Simple answer is success. due to more extensive and effective anti-money laundering control that financial institutions are applying, manipulation of trade finance is becoming more and more appealing to the financial criminals and becoming more profitable. So the underlying technique of most TBML, that is state-based money laundering schemes, are straightforward and relatively simple. They are difficult to detect because they are layered within the mass of legitimate payment flowing through the web of global reach. TBML techniques range from a simple fraud to a leveraging of complex network of trade and financial transactions. As you know, at most basic level, launderers transfer funds between countries by representing the price, quantity, or quality of invoicing of goods. But what I believe, as long as the difference between the real value and the stated value of goods is not obvious, the odds of detecting by regulator and other interested parties are near zero. In AML, I would say around 20% detections are also through observations by the front office staff. Best example I can give, doing billions of trade transactions and operating through very small cubicle office, not having much staff to handle big volumes. Here employees play a very key role. Employees at all levels needs to be aware of anti-fraud activities, have a clear understanding of what is expected of them, know that organizations take the threat of frauds very seriously, which means zero tolerance limit, and knows where to seek assistance and advice. That's where the whistleblowing comes into picture. Whistleblowing service should be encouraged, and this will help to reduce fraud, which is not possible or take time to detect by implementation of artificial intelligence. Much cannot be discussed in this global platform, but I can share a few illustrative list of indicators which can be incorporated in your trade-based money laundering transactions. Example, like LCs are issued in favor of seller whose name is not appearing in the list of supplier. Buyers and the sellers have warehouse factories in the same area, and buyers and the sellers are dealing for many years. The buy the LC is required in a given case. Transportation expense in the statement of P&L are very low as compared to the trade transactions. The beneficiary of LC is a related party. That means the accommodation bill can be there. Transportation of goods is done through local transporter and not through approved transporters. In case of beneficiary bank, the fund disbursed by discounting bills are transferred immediately to another bank. In case of beneficiary bank, the operation in the account is not commensurate with the amount of bill discounted. The consideration amount in transaction is exorbitantly high as compared to peers. The use of artificial intelligence for the fraud prevention is not a new concept, and it's not the stuff of science fictions according to its proponents. In fact, artificial intelligence solutions can be used to enhance security across a number of business sectors, including retail and financial. Data analytics tools enable you to analyze data to help answer some of the questions. Example, what happened, where it happened, how many times did it happen, what is the volume and value movement, what rule or thresholds have been reached, are there any compliance issues with the contracts. These analytical tools can be used to detect various fraudulent issues and raise red flag by performing tests that can identify and isolate suspicious transactions within those mass data. Therefore, it acts as a comprehensive health checkup for your organizations and for detecting anomalies and potential fraud in your business process. In the last survey, 36% of the respondents said they are finding difficulty integrating data in their, or they are finding biggest challenge in integrating with their data for fraud preventions. The problem is that due to unstructured nature of big data, banks and financial sector companies aren't always aware of exactly what information it contains and exactly how to harness this information, analyze it, or understand it. This means not only the large quantity of potential useful data is getting lost, but that fraud, bribery, corruption, and money laundering and other white-collar criminal activity may remain either very difficult to detect because it's buried in the morass of data. Best practice for implementing big data for fraud prevention in the financial sector is it's always recommended to start with a small and specific use for big data. For example, identifying one or two business problems or areas that can be resolved by improving fraud detections and create a task force comprised of compliance, legal, IT, and the business unit representatives to devise an outcome-based plan. Of course, get senior level guy in, and this is a part of risk management strategy. It is critical to ensure that the company is working with a high quality data, not quantity. Make sure to ensure that the proper data is being collected. Signal is segregated from the noise to allow for effective, meaningful data analysis. Generally, we don't clear the noise. Assess and plan for the relevant regulatory environment. Why I'm bringing regulatory environment into picture? Because we have to critically understand the boundaries for using customer data and the relevant privacy law. If you see nowadays, you will find there's an increasing trend in levying penalties due to breach of data protection, especially in European countries. To analyze big data properly, organizations also need the right mixture of strategy, policies, and the skills. Last thing I would like to emphasize on reputations. Everything is fine for management, analytics, artificial intelligence, but the reputation is the key thing. Having a reputation for integrity is crucial for safeguarding the market confidence and the public trust. This is especially important in an environment marked by intense scrutiny and the rising enforcement. Thank you very much.
So Bernard, CHOON, and Devendra, thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing your thoughts and experiences.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. And thanks to the wonderful audience for staying online. Also, a big thank you, as usual, to our partners, Asian Bankers Association, especially Ernest, Amador, and Meg, for working tirelessly to get this webinar organized. We look forward to seeing all of you again at the next Fintelekt ABA webinar on December 16th, which, as I mentioned, will be on AML governance. And let me also remind everyone about the Philippines AML CTF Summit happening next week, being organized jointly by the Philippines FIU and Fintelekt. With that, let me close today's webinar. Have a great day ahead and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Bye-bye.